We last left off at Raphael. Raphael was really important as far as creating portraiture for a lot of this time period, especially for Pope Leo. So, Pope Leo was an important patron. He pushed the interest of the Medici family that was exiled for decades prior to this Pope's election. In the Pope Leo X's portrait, the Pope was seated in a study before him. On the table is an illuminated manuscript with an eyeglass because the Pope had poor eyesight. His cousin, Giulio de' Medici, is to the Pope's right. The other person in the portrait is Luigi de' Rossi. Each figure is absorbed in their own thoughts. So here we can see Raphael's portraiture. So we're still seeing kind of like that light airiness of Raphael's work. We can see that, the portrait also kind of has that triangular composition between three figures, which is a common thing we see in Renaissance painting. So, now that we covered a little bit on Raphael, we're going to jump to Michelangelo, and I showed the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Michelangelo for good humor. So, Michelangelo, that's what he really looks like. So he is considered one of the old masters. Michelangelo was a Florentine artist who is well known for his self-imposed isolation, creative fury, independence, and daring innovations. He led Italians of an era to speak of charismatic personality of the man and expressive characters of his works in one Terraplata, which are the twins inspiring. In 1500, the Catholic Church was one of the greatest art patrons. Michelangelo was commissioned to do a lot of work for the Catholic Church. One of the most famous ones was the Sistine Chapel located in the Vatican. Michelangelo was known as a sculptor first and foremost. He was an architect, poet, and engineer. Michelangelo considered sculpture superior to painting because sculpture shares the divine power to make man, and Michelangelo on painting versus sculpture. He drew ideas similar to the philosopher Plato. Michelangelo believed that the image of the artist's hand produce must come from the idea of the artist's mind. Conceptually, Michelangelo and contemporary artist Richard Serra draw similarities in their ideas behind their work. They both feel that sculpture should be a confrontational and immersive experience. So this is contemporary artist Richard Serra, who's known for doing a lot of large-scale works that are meant to kind of immerse the viewer. And it's interesting that Michelangelo had that same concept. So this is a very famous Michelangelo piece. This is the Pieta. It was made from 1498 through 1500, made out of marble. So this was carved. And this is at St. Peter's in the Vatican in Rome. Michelangelo is also very famous for making the David piece. So you could see this over at the Vatican as well. David was a piece he was created to make as a civic symbol led by the Florence Cathedral Building Committee. There was a block of marble left from an aborted commission that was supposed to be another David for the Republic. The colossal statue was referred to as the Giant. It was supposed to be displayed in the cathedral's buttresses, however, they ultimately displayed it in the piazza. The sculpture assured forever his reputation as an extraordinary talent. Michelangelo took a lot of inspiration from Hellenistic figures that come from the Greek. His David is compositionally and emotionally connected to the unseen presence beyond the statue. The conflict with Goliath is complied. So if you're not familiar with the story of David and Goliath, Goliath was essentially kind of a character that was terrorizing a lot of local towns, and David was a hero that was essentially sent by God to conquer this giant. And the way he did it was he was like a humble young man, and he killed Goliath by a slingshot. And Goliath was like a massive, very intimidating giant. So the Sistine Chapel, another one of Michelangelo's famous works. Michelangelo was offered a commission to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The preparation was faulty, and Michelangelo had to do repairs in the Sistine Chapel ceiling before painting it. Michelangelo also faced enormous difficulties with the ceiling's dimension and the height above its pavement, and the complicated perspective problems that the vault's height and curve presented, in addition to his inexperience in the fresco technique. Yet, in less than 4 years, this work was produced. So the details of the Sistine Chapel. It is 9 narrative panels describing creation as recorded in Genesis that run along the crown of the vault, from God's separation of light and darkness above the altar to the drunkenness of Noah's nearest entrance to the chapel. The work talks about the history and the fall of humankind in reverse order. The sections of the Sistine Chapel are in the creation of Adam, the Counter Reformation, and the Last Judgment. So, still photos really don't do this justice. I mean, this is definitely one of those pieces I think you have to actually go see in person one day. But this is an overall view of the Sistine Chapel. So you can see, Michelangelo had a lot to do with the architecture as well as, making all the frescoes that were in this work. So it was a very challenging thing having to paint on, the ceiling, at different arches and whatnot. So this was definitely a very labor intensive work. So this is the Last Judgment by Michelangelo. You can see a very complicated scene. This is Saint Bartholomew over here on the right, and basically there's some ideas on what this is. Some say it's Michelangelo's self-portrait being tortured because he had to do this giant piece. Others say it was Raphael because he had a rivalry with Raphael. They definitely did not like each other. More so because Raphael was like a social butterfly, and then Michelangelo was kind of a really kind of grumpy kind of character that was really immersed in the studio. So anyway, these are the old masters. I thought this was fun just to show because they have like a T-shirt of them. I actually have this as a sticker on my fridge, but that's kind of like the rough interpretation of them. So now we're going back to Venice, and we're going to move on to Giovanni Bellini. And this is Madonna with Child and Saints, 1505, oil on wood transferred to canvas. Bellini was a Venetian painter at the turn of the century and one of the primarily responsible ones for developing coloristic high Renaissance painting style in the Maritime Republic. He was widely acclaimed for many of his Madonnas, and which he painted both half-length and in small devotional panels and in length of grandiose altarpieces, like the Zaccaria altarpiece. Bellini has also painted works in references to Greek mythology, like the Feast of the Gods. So here you can see the Feast of the Gods. A lot of the painting works becoming a little bit more complicated, more bright color usage. Also, you're seeing a lot more landscape and narrative happening. So a little bit of an evolution from the past styles that we've been seeing. Tiziano, Vecelli, and Titian. A supreme colorist and the master of oil medium, could cast a mood of tranquil reverie and dreaming us over an entire scene, evoking the landscape of lost but forgotten paradise. So here's Titian. Titian's also considered an old master as well. Titian has a really immense ability to create some really stunning and dramatic painting work. This is the Assumption of the Virgin. This is made from 1515 through 1508. It's oil on wood. So now we're starting to see the oil coming into Italy a little bit more. Remember before we were seeing a lot of fresco work, egg tempera. So now we're seeing oil painting happening like we were seeing in Flanders. Bacchus and Adrian. This is one of Titian's most famous works. This piece was based on the ancient poem of Catullus, which is roughly 6 foot squared on canvas. Bacchus was accompanied by a boisterous group and arrives on the island of Naxos in a leopard chariot to save Adrian. Venus of Urbino in 1538 is at the height of its powers, painted the so-called Venus probably for Geobaldo II. The title elevates the status of classical to mythology, what is probably a representation of essential Italian women in her bedchamber. Whether then a nude is divine or moral, he bases his version off of an earlier painting of Venus, Giorgione. In Venetian paintings, color plays a prominent role. The red tones of the matron's skirt and the muted reds of the tapestries against neutral whites of the matron's sleeves and the kneeling girl's gown echo the deep Venetian red set off by the pale neutral whites of the linen and warm ivory gold flesh. So here is Bacchus and Adrian. This is made from 1520 to 1523. And then here we could see the Venus of Urbino. And, this is one, this is kind of like the second time we're seeing, more nudes being portrayed. And the reason why you can kind of get away with this is if it's referencing like Greek mythology. So we saw that earlier with the other Venus that we looked at. And now we're seeing it with this one as well. So mannerism is the next area that we're going to start covering. So this is 16th century Italian Renaissance style of art, focusing on Rome, Florence, and Venice, which was dominant in the Italian heating, sculpture, and architecture. Key aspects of mannerism is representation of mode, characterized by style of being stylish, culture, and elegant. This term can be unfortunate in many respects. First, when originally applied to the artworks examined in this section, mannerism had negative connotations similar to Gothic when it was first used. Excuse me. Many works, however, are not inferior to the quality compared to the high Renaissance works, although they are unquestionably different. Second, mannerism is not a unified style. It can encompass diverse personal styles, represent a break from high Renaissance norms. Mannerism is a style in European art and emerged later years of the Italian High Renaissance around 1520, spreading about 1530 and lasting about the end of the 16th century in Italy. Excuse me. So this is the Madonna and Child with Angels, known as the Madonna with the Long Neck, from 1534 to 1540. So a lot of things you notice with mannerism is things are like exaggerated styles. So some key characteristics: the central focal point, a sense of artifice, which is art that is not natural. The mannerists reveal the constructed nature of their art. Pontormo, his work was purposely eliminated elements to tell a story. He also grouped many of his figures along a vertical axis. The images become more about human relationships between the figures. So here's Jacopo Pontormo. This is deposition from the cross. So this means Jesus is being taken off of the cross. So you can see the figures are elongated. Portions are a little bit off. And the colors are a little bit more muted than what we're used to seeing. It's also different seeing things painted in an arch kind of formation. Also, we have a lot of kind of twisted bodies and figures that, make the image a little bit more complex. Parmigiano is another artist, an artist 9 years younger than Pontormo. Giacomo Francesco Maria Marzola of Parmigiano, was 9 years younger than Pontormo, and he was a talented painter and made a deep impression on Pope Clement VII. He was also well known for Madonna with the Long Neck, so that was the first one we looked at up here. And then there it is again. So perspective in the gaze. So a couple lectures back, we looked at Jan van Eyck, and something really famous that Jan van Eyck was able to do was create an image where he had this convex, image of the reverse of the people that are being painted. So this is the second time we're seeing that with Parmigiano, and this is a self-portrait in a convex mirror. So the way he did this, he was trying to purposely impress the Pope. This artist devised an unusual way to impress the Pope with his skill. During a barbershop visit, the artist saw himself in a window of a convex mirror and decided to paint a self-portrait. To imitate the appearance of a convex mirror, the artist had a carpenter prepare a section of wood that was a spear of the same size and shape to the barber's mirror. He used oil glaze to produce a surface of luster to heighten an illusion of the view. We were looking into a mirror and not a painting. The next artist is Bronzino. This is Allegory of a Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time, which is allegory, which is meaning obscure. One interpretation of love is folly, and this is discovered in time. Cupid kisses and fondles the breast of his mother Venus, who holds the apple for being declared the most beautiful goddess. Folly prepares to shower them with rose petals. Time, the older figure on the top, pulls back the curtain to reveal the scene. In the backgrounds, the shadows at the left, the old hag Ave tears her hair, and the background figure on the right is the serpent's tail, which represents fraud. Okay, and then this is Eleanor of Toledo and her son. This is an oil on canvas where she gazes loftily on the world from her lofty social position. The portraits are as much as clothing as the people wearing them. Anguissola. This is an artist that introduced a new type of portrait that was more loose and aloof portrait. He used more of an informal intimacy. Some more on Anguissola. This is a woman artist that learned from aged Michelangelo. Few successful women artists that are not allowed to paint from the nude, so could not do history or classical paintings that were necessary for success. Portraits mostly of women and children because men, to be painted by a woman was less prestigious, and often painted self-portraits or family members because of difficulty getting models. Still, she was famous for her time. She was married twice to a Sicilian lord and a sea captain. At the end of a long, successful life, she gave advice to young painter and admirer Anthony van Dyck. So Anguissola labored at difficulties of design with greater study of better grace than any other woman at our time. She was not only succeeded in drawing, coloring, and copying from nature, and in making excellent copies of work by other hands, but she was also executed herself by alone and some very choice, beautiful works of painting. So now we're going to take a look at Mannerist sculpture. So Benvenuto Cellini, Giambologna, figures are elongated and very expressive. Cellini was a master goldsmith, and he made this table for Francis I. The figures are of Neptune and Tellus. Giambologna, a marble sculptor, created a sculpture drawn from the legendary history of Rome. The viewpoints of the sculpture change and drastically, and the figures feel cylindrical. So here we can see Cellini. This work was actually stolen from a museum in 2003, and it was hidden for 3 years and trapped. And the thief, security specialist, was trapped through his cell phone. It was recovered on January 2006 and returned to the museum. It was made for the goldsmith for French King Francis I. You can see Neptune holding a trident, and the ship holds salt. The female figure is Mother Earth, arched next to holds the pepper. This is Giambologna, and this is the abduction of Sabian women. So again, like we saw with the beginning of Mannerism, with kind of like those twisted type paintings, where you see kind of like the bodies like weaving in and out with each other. We're seeing that as well with sculptural work here. So now we're going to take a look at architecture. So this is Giuliano Romano, and this is a lot of the famous architecture that he has in Mantua, Italy. Romano was really interested in playing around with various classical forms, so you can see some inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman architecture. Federico Gonzalo Giulio Romano and the Palazzo dei Te, just as the clergy were the primary resource of artistic commissions during the Middle Ages, Renaissance patrons, whether popes, dukes, or bankers, and a powerful, often controlling voice in the content and even forms of artworks they paid for. Giulio was celebrated as the best artist in Italy after the death of Raphael and the Count Baldassare de Castiglione. In Rome, at the time that the ambassador Federico Gonzaga was ordered to procure an architect, and the Count worked at this so diligently with entreaties and promises that Giulio declared that he would go at it any time and was provided leave by Pope Clement. Castiglione gave Giulio as well as a furnished home and provided a salary and food. So Mannerist architecture. This used classical architecture elements presented in a highly personal and unorthodox manner, rejecting balance, order, and stability that were hallmarks of high Renaissance style and aiming to reveal the contrived nature of architectural design. Giulio Romano, applying the orthodox approach, was the goal when he designed the Palazzo dei Te in Mantua, with it formulated with almost the entire architectural vocabulary of Mannerism. Giulio became his mentor's executor upon his death, finishing the unfinished fresco paintings in the Vatican stanza. So this is Giulio Romano, and you could see with this work, he integrated a lot of the painting into the architecture, made it quite immersive. And it's really beautiful the way he was able to accomplish this work. He also um, worked with ceilings as well, and this is a ceiling fresco um, that you could see here. A lot of complicated designs. Again, a key aspect of mannerism. A lot of the figures kind of weaving in and out with one another. Tintoretto. Jacobi Rabosti, a student of Titian, aspired to combine Titian's color and Michelangelo's drawing. So another thing with the mannerisms, we're starting to see things get a little bit more dramatic, with higher contrast and a lot more drama with the images. Tintoretto also did a lot with perspective. This is the discovery of the body of Saint Mark. And this is a piece where Tintoretto did commission, and he worked on this for 23 years. So you could see, this entire room was addressed as well as the ceiling. So it was a quite complex work to make. Tintoretto was also really famous for doing this version of the Last Supper, which was a lot different than some of the portraits or some of the images that we saw before. We're seeing a different view. Jesus is the focal point with the halo here, but then when you look at the imagery, we have a lot more going on. So in this case, we're kind of seeing like the behind of the scenes. So we're seeing servants kind of helping prep the dinner. We also kind of see this air of like ghostly spirits or figures throughout the room. So, it's quite a compelling version of the Last Supper. So you could see the differences with Tintoretto and Michelangelo here, just for some comparison. So now we're going to look at Paolo Veronese. Born in Verona, settled in Venice in 1553 and became Tintoretto's principal rival. Most popular decorative painter in Venice, attracted to Raphael's aesthetic manner than Michelangelo. Veronese also was known for his decorative paintings and mythological scenes, and he could create an excellent portrait. So this is another piece that he did called the Veronese. This is another piece Veronese did. This is the Supper in the House of Levi, made in 1573. It's an oil on canvas. It is 18 by 42 feet in the Academy at Venice. Veronese also changed the original title of Last Supper after questioning the Inquisition about why drunks, dwarves, and Germans were included with Christ. And this is the Apotheosis of Venice. It's an oil on canvas. On the ceiling, oil on canvas, like all wall paintings in Venice, were done this way because frescoes don't work in a damp climate. So Andrea Palladio, this is a famous Italian Renaissance architect that was active from the Venetian Republic. Palladio was influenced by Greek and Roman architecture, primarily Vitruvius, and is widely considered to be one of the most influential individuals in the history of architecture. While he designed church and palaces, he was well known for country houses and villas. His teachings were summarized in architectural treatises. The 4 books of architecture gained him worldwide recognition. Between 1530 and 1538, Count Gian Giorgio Trissino, a humanist poet and scholar, was rebuilding his villa at Crisoli around the Vicenza in ancient Roman or classical style. Palladio was working there as a mason, noticed by Trissino, who undertook to expand his practice with a humanist education. The Villa Trissino was rebuilt to plan a reminiscent of designs of Baldassare Bazzuri, an important high Renaissance architect, planned to house a learned academy of Trissino's pupils who lived among monastic life, studying mathematics, music, philosophy, and classical authors. The villa represented Trissino's interpretation of ancient Roman architect and theorist Vitruvius, whom Palladio was later to describe as his master and guide. The name Palladio was given to Andrea, a humanist habit, an allusion to the mythological figure Pallas Athena, and a character in Trissino's poem Italia Liberata dei Gatti, which indicates hopes Trissino had for his protege. So Villa Trissino, so you can see he made a lot more modest accommodations, things that were made for the countryside, but still has a little bit of Roman and Greek architecture influences in the work. This is the Basilica in Vicenza, Italy. So you can see, a lot of repeating arch forms, still, reminiscent of the Greek and Roman with the statues on top, but it's a little bit more modest and simple architecture. But also has a lot of beauty on the inside, So this is a Teatro Olimpico. So this is a theater. This is Villa Godi, and this is one of Palladio's first projects. So, worked on more modest accommodations that were more meant for like the wealthy. Also made a lot of like countryside villas. You can see a couple of those here. But, a lot of these works are just really stunning pieces of architecture, and also addressed the painting work on the interiors as well. Has quite an extensive portfolio of works and also did churches as well. So, a recap. So, the High Renaissance. So, our old masters, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian. The artists created very realistic interpretations of the figure. Raphael created work with lighter tonalities compared to Leonardo. Michelangelo created works with very heroic physics. Mannerism, which happened from 1520 to 1600, is an alternative to the High Renaissance style. A prime feature of Mannerist art is artifice with many figures that had elongated proportions and were more expressive than the High Renaissance. Late Renaissance, Palladio was an important theorist and architect and became the official architect of Venice in 1570. He carried on Bramante's classical style in his designs of Venetian villas and the mainland chief. Among them was Villa Rotonda near Vicenza. So now we're going into the High Renaissance and Mannerism in Northern Europe and Spain. So, Money Changer and his wife. A presentation of a professional man transacting in business. He holds scales, checking the weight of coins on the table. The artist detailed renderings of figures, setting, and objects suggest the fidelity to an observable fact and provides insight to developing commercial practices. But Money Changer and his wife is also a commentary on Netherlandish values and morals. The painting highlights the financial transactions that were increasingly prominent as part of the secular life in the Netherlands and that distracted Christians from religious duties. The banker's wife, for example, shows the more interest in her watching her husband away with the money rather than reading her prayer book. This was incorporated into the painting. Numerous references to the importance of moral, righteous, and spiritual life, including a candlestick and a carafe with a water, traditional religious symbols, and a couple ignores them, focusing solely on money. So you can see that with the portrait here, and you can also see the Jan van Eyck influence as well with the convex mirror. And you can see with this, they're showing kind of, the pitfalls of not following your morals. So Northern Humanism. It is multi-Paris religious conflict engulfing 16th century Europe did not, however, prevent and may have accelerated the exchange of intellectual and artistic ideas because the artists frequently moved from one area in search of religious freedom and lucrative commissions. Catholic Italy and the most Protestant Holy Roman Empire share a lively commerce, both economic and cultural. Among them were the most influential Christian humanist Dutchman Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam and the Englishman Sir Thomas More. Matthias Grunwald worked for the archbishops of Mainz in Germany and created the Eisenheim altarpiece, a complex and fascinating polytech referencing the Catholic beliefs and incorporating several references to Catholic doctrines, as the Lamb whose wounds spirit into a chalice and the depiction of Christ's crucifixion. Created for the majestic hospital order of St. Anthony of Einsiedeln, the altarpiece takes form of both carved wood and a shrine by Nicholas Hagenauer. So here, this is Matthias Greenwald. This is the Eisenheim altarpiece from the Chapel of the Holy St. Anthony. So you can see this is a very complex polytech. So not only does it have these big panels in the front, but it has several that kind of go in the back. So you have to see this in several tiers. I thought it was important to show a person in this image. You see how the large scale of this really immense work of this altarpiece, which is quite impressive. And here's a detail of one of those. This is the Eisenheim altarpiece. This is from the Chapel of St. Anthony. So, you can see there's a lot of gold ornamentation as well as, which also includes a lot of heavily detailed oil paintings. Albert Dürer. So, this is one of my favorite artists. He was one of the first artists outside of Italy to become international celebrity. He was a highly skilled painter, but his reputation today as its own ruts on printmaking and graphic art, which he promoted with an astute businessman's skill. With the aid of his wife, his mother, and an agent, he aggressively marketed his engraving on wood. He made woodcuts and became a wealthy man. He traveled extensively through Northern Europe. As a result, he met many leading humanist artists of the time, including Erasmus of Rotterdam and Venetian master Giovanni Bellini. He was one of the first Northern European artists to leave a record of his life and a career throughout correspondence, a detailed diary, and series of self-portraits. So this is Albert Dürer. So this is a self-portrait where he painted himself similar to Jesus. As you can see, very talented oil painter. And this isn't in the textbook or anything, but this is one of my favorite woodcut prints. This is the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So this is, again, a woodcut. So, a lot of detail to make these because you have to carve these by hand. And I just think that the work is absolutely stunning. So this, we'll go over the portrait. This portrait is a portrayal of the artist that evokes the medieval devotional images of Christ. The position of the right of the hand resembles but does not duplicate because it would have been blasphemous. Christ's standard gesture of blessing in Byzantine icons. The focus of the hand is doubtless a reference to the artist's hand as a creative instrument. Deeply affected by humanistic views that had emerged in the Renaissance Italy of the artist as a divinely inspired genius, he inspired painting himself by painting him as a Christ-like figure. The fall of man. Trained as a goldsmith by his father, he took painting and printmaking. Dürer developed an extraordinary proficiency in handling the baron. He developed a technical ability with his extraordinary skill in drawing, which enabled him to produce a body of graphic work that few artists rival for quality and number. Many of his prints were book illustrations and also sold single sheets of many people as ordinary means could buy. The German artist aspects of printmaking is evidence in his woodcuts. So this is The Fall of Man by Albert Dürer. So this is an engraving. So this is a method where you would engrave with some sort of metal tool on a surface and rub ink into the grooves, usually print on a wet paper. And this is done a similar way. So something that's really tricky about this image is it has a word called melancholia that's in there. So what printmaking artists had to do is they have to think about things in reverse. So he would have had to carve that in reverse to get it to the proper way. Melancholia 1. This is one of the most famous prints that the artist created. Reveals not only his unsurpassed skill with the engraver burning, but also a great deal about his psyche as a Renaissance artist. Melancholy is one of the temperaments associated with the four humors, the fluids that were on the basis of theories about body functions developed by a Greek physician, Hippocrates, and practiced in medieval physiology. Artistic melancholy, which explains the numerical banner on the bat of the creature, the dark of the engraving. Above a brooding figure is melancholy with an hourglass with sands of time running out. All around here are tools in the artist builder. However, the tools are useless to the frustrated artist suffering from melancholy. The Four Apostles. This is a major oil work, 2-panel painting which he produced without commission and presented to the city fathers of Nuremberg in 1526 to be hung in the city. St. John and Peter up here on the left panel, Morgan Paul on the right, before saints, individual personality, and portrait-like figures documents the support for German theologian Martin Luther. So here you can see Albert Dürer's 4 panels. This is from the Hall of Nuremberg in Germany. So we'll go ahead and stop here today, and I'll go ahead and post the other lecture next.